Hello, I'm John McKay. I'm the Member of Parliament for Scarborough-Guildwood, and in this episode, I'm interviewing Neil Hetherington, a longtime friend and really a person that I've admired for many years, and particularly on how he gives back to the community. This is, after all, a podcast on some people doing some pretty extraordinary things in the way in which they give back to their community. So, Neil, you've had a really interesting life in terms of all of the various accomplishments that you've been involved in. In particular, I took note that your grandfather was one of the most significant persons in the Salvation Army. And so what does that mean? What does that mean to you personally as a person that actually has had a lot in the to do in the nonprofit sector? What's the significance of your grandfather being in the Salvation Army?
Well, so my grandpa was General Arnold Brown, and he was the international leader of the Salvation Army in the late 70s and early 80s. And it was his inward faith and values that drove an outward expression of that through the assistance that he and the Army provided to and continue to provide for hundreds of thousands of people worldwide. And so I consider myself very fortunate to have had the time that I had with my grandpa, who was a marvelous communicator, who could captivate an audience or a congregation, and set an organization and the people towards a common goal of achieving it, because it was not so much just a goal, but rather a calling and a mission. And so the times and the conversations I had with him, I appreciate. I wish that in life circumstances now that he was still here, and because I have a lot of questions that I'd like to ask.
Yes. Well, I imagine your grandpa would be pretty proud of his grandson at this point, because you have been involved with Habitat and Humanity and Dixon Hall and various other organizations. But so, there's a biblical saying that faith without works is dead. But is the reverse also true? Works without faith is dead.
But
Have you carried on with the faith?
I think with now more than ever, faith is an important component of, regardless of an individual's personal decisions. For me, it's certainly a motivator. It's a course corrector from time to time where I need that.
And especially lately.
Yeah. So it's been a comforter at the same time. We look at what is happening in terms of the city, in terms of need with the food bank, and see that need going up, unfortunately, and dramatically. And each one of those statistics, each one of those numbers that are increasing is a story of concern, and so we need to get motivated to do something about that. There's Bishop Tutu said many times. He said, the newspaper is God's to-do list delivered to your front door every single day.
Yeah, it's a great saying. It's a great thing.
And I think we need to pick it up, read it, and do something about it. And
yeah.
So, as much
well,
as
I wonder whether Bishop Tutu is going to update that so that the electronic delivery goes directly to your emails. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, were you born and raised in Toronto?
Yeah, so I've had the privilege of living in Toronto all of my life, with 3 years where I was in New York City, mm-hmm. and so that time in New York was just after Hurricane Sandy, and so So we worked very hard on the recovery there, and but Toronto is home, and so there was a calling home, and really just very excited to continue the nonprofit work with the Daily Bread.
Yeah. And so where did you live in Toronto when you were growing up?
So I grew up in the Lawrence Park and still close by there, and
Not
so
Scarborough? You weren't growing up in Scarborough?
well, it feels like I grew up in Scarborough, given the number of activities and
I know, that's where we see you all the time.
community meetings that are there. It's an area of the city that I love very much, primarily for the diversity of, in terms of, and I loved how, on Metro Morning, they would constantly, every food place that they would speak about always seemed to involve a drive out to Scarborough, and because those were where the authentic restaurants were and are, and so I find myself out there a fair bit. And
But if you're a foodie, you come to Scarborough.
yeah,
That's the way life is. Yeah.
I wouldn't consider myself a connoisseur. I enjoy good food, probably a little too much, and but I have no expertise in it at all. I just know what I like, and away we go.
Well, I see you went to Royal St. George. My son went there as well. So now, did you stay your entire high school at Royal St. George?
I did. So St. George's is just a fantastic school, and it was fantastic for me in that it was smaller classes, which I appreciated, a faculty that cared very much, and I'm still in touch regularly with some of the faculty, and so I have great memories of that high school. And they were out on a regular basis, sending out teams to the Daily Bread, sending out teams to Habitat for Humanity, and really, showing that they care about community. I wish
That was our experience as well. That Royal St. George was really quite involved in the larger community. Yeah.
It's they have a full-time individual, which is with the primary function of making sure that those young men and boys are out in the community. I mean, being perfectly blunt, each one of those students has significant amounts of privilege in their life, and the recognition of that, I think, is incredibly important. And maybe tying that back to my grandpa, I think that there was always a certain humbling that he required of each of us to recognize the multitude of blessings that we've got, and to give back in the best possible way that we can, so that others are empowered to make sure that everybody gets to live with the dignity that we'd want to live with ourselves.
And this podcast has been largely devoted to people who give back in quite extraordinary ways, and certainly your life is emblematic of how you've been motivated to give back, and you give back out of a sense of duty, but a sense of faith, a sense of responsibility, a sense of citizenship, and it's admirable in every respect. Now, what's not quite so admirable is that you went to Western University, University of Western Ontario. I'm going to work on the assumption you couldn't get into Queens. Was that
that's a good assumption. And I will tell you, not only could I not get into Queens, but after third year at Western, they decided that I should go on a dean's sabbatical.
Oh, yeah. What are those voluntary sabbaticals?
A dean sabbatical meant that I had to tell my parents that I was going to be doing something different that September. And but I loved Huron College at Western, and I loved visiting my smarter friends who went to Queens.
Yeah. Well, occasionally people from Queens will talk to people from University of Western Ontario. It's very noble of them that way to do that.
It's,
So
I guess it's,
you go off to Trudel, and then you see the light. But I'm assuming you learned something at Trudel. What did you learn at Trudel?
yeah, Tridel's a wonderful condominium developer. I think one of Canada's largest, if not the largest, who, they've built well over 100,000 homes in the city. They are a company that builds quality, that stands behind the product. And so from a for-profit perspective, I was really quite proud to be part of that organization. And they taught me significantly in terms of project management, how to get things done on time, on budget. And so it was a wonderful experience. But in 2000, when I was 25, I had the opportunity to make a change in my career, and that change was sparked on by having traveled to Africa and Eastern Europe and building with Habitat for Humanity. And the position was CEO of Habitat for Humanity here in Toronto. And I put in an application and was shocked that the board of directors said, yeah, we'd like you to be the guy. And so that sort of set course for 16 wonderful years of building with them. And so, well,
with quite a number of projects in Scarborough, by the way.
There were, I'm not sure the number of houses that were built, but what I do occasionally when I'm out getting some food in Scarborough, I have gone by a number of the projects, 5, 10, and now coming on 20 years later, which shows the gray hair, but it's wonderful to see how well maintained those homes are.
Exactly. Yeah.
Pride of ownership. There needs to be more, and there needs to be a constant effort to make sure that those who are in need of deep subsidy for housing, just above the shelter level, that we make sure that we provide for that. And I think, one of the things that I think your government ought to be very proud of is the poverty reduction strategy, the national housing strategy. These are tools that are effective, and I'm glad that the province signed on with the national housing strategy to make sure that we can reach that goal, that housing as a right is achieved across the country. I think it's a worthwhile goal, and I'm pleased that the government brought forward that strategy.
Yeah, I agree with your observation that when you are on the foodie run, you see those projects, because you can take some pride in well, I can think of 2 projects on Kingston Road, another one on Lawrence Avenue, and I'm sure others will come to mind over time. But every one of them shows pride of ownership, and it's an interesting, and I think model that should be emulated by others as to getting people from, if you will, marginal living conditions into a home ownership living conditions through sweat equity. I'm going to work on the assumption, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that you met Jimmy Carter. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to build with him on a almost annual basis between 2001 and 2013 or 14, in that neighborhood. And he came after Hurricane Sandy to New York City, and we had the opportunity to do a press conference together on 6th Street East, down in the Lower East Side, and it was out front of the very first Jimmy Carter work project that was done in 1984, and he went into one of the apartments. It's a walk-up unit. I think it's about 8 stories or so. And he walked in, and we had arranged that he would visit the families that had moved in 1984. And he walked into the apartment, and they had put a little spread out for Rosalind and him. and he sat down on the couch and he said, "You moved the beam. You opened up the kitchen here." And he had remembered, out of the hundreds and probably thousands of houses that he's built, he remembered that particular unit and made that comment. He said, and the person said, "Yeah, we made that change a few years ago." And it was, he's a brilliant man who I have deep love and respect for. He has an incredible mind. At the age of 94, he'll be 95 shortly. He's certainly with it. He is still teaching Sunday school on any Sunday that he can. He is fiercely committed to human rights. He's fiercely committed to waging war on diseases that have been that have gone sort of by the wayside, that people forget about, like river blindness and guinea worm diseases. And he has committed himself through the Carter Center to the elevation of human rights. And Emory University, where he, up until just recently, was still teaching. He's written over 20 books, and in each of them there's wisdom there. And he's a man, when we talk about putting your faith into action, that I think can be held into high esteem, and is a sharp contrast to the holder of the office right now. And
I'm glad you said that. I was going to just dodge around that one.
I'm happy to say that. I'm very happy to say that, because I'm sad to have to say it, but
yeah, it really is. Yeah.
And
he's a admirable man in every way you can possibly imagine, and it is sad and it's tragic that his political career didn't turn out better than it did turn out. And in some respects, one could argue that that was the point at which American politics started to go into its current direction, because you had a really good man who was deeply concerned about the welfare of his citizens, who empathized and sympathized in every way possible, was well informed, studied his briefing notes, treated people with respect, and things just started to go south and just got worse and worse.
Well, if you look at, sort of his legacy, and you think about the only long-lasting peace agreement, it's the Camp David Accord.
Yeah.
And so that is monumental and long-standing. And I was reflecting. I was just reading something on him the other day about the debates that he was having with Reagan, and that line that Reagan used of "There you go again," which he said in one of his debates, was in response to a clearly articulated point-by-point program of how Carter was going to bring in universal health care. Yeah. And Reagan simply said, "Well, there you go again on your and it saddens me in that he was so articulate. He laid out the clear plan, but it was not in a digestible fashion. It wasn't in a soundbite, and therefore, Reagan, who had charisma and who had the many positive qualities, but he certainly had charisma and an ability to connect with the camera. And that won out. I think deep intelligence, faith, and a desire to make sure that everybody had healthcare.
Yeah, it's an interesting statement about politics, because some people come into politics for the best of reasons, as did Jimmy Carter. A quite clear commitment to the betterment of humankind, but the superficial and the trivial and the gut punch frequently overrides, which is quite sad. I consider Jimmy Carter to be probably the most influential more influential in his presidency outside of the actual 4 years than possibly during his 4 years, but still an amazing man. But anyways, back to Neil Hetherington here. Neil, you had your stint in New York. You came home. You went to Dixon Hall, and then now you're at the food bank. And I'm going to imagine that you hadn't quite anticipated that you would be heading a massive organization like the Daily Food Bank in a pandemic. I'm just going to wildly guess that. Uh, so
That's a very fair assumption.
yeah. So what's the biggest surprise in these past few months?
Well, the past few months have been extraordinary. We have seen sort of the best and the worst of the situation. We've seen individuals who have had to make use of food banks who, had full-time positions, and then all of a sudden that was ripped away, and their incomes did not allow them to save the funds that they needed. The cost of living in the city was such that when a paycheck or two went away, they needed to turn to the Daily Bread Food Bank. And so we immediately saw mass increases. Some food banks, I think about the Agincourt Community Center, just north of and west of your riding, had a 3-time increase in terms of the number of people who were coming. At the same time, our organization was fighting in that 30% of our food banks closed down because they were in community centers that couldn't operate, or they were operated by volunteer groups. So we had mass increase in terms of the need, and we had decrease on our supply chain. And so we had to overcome that. Now, the good part, I guess, of COVID, and I say that obviously with trepidation, has been to see how humanity has come together when it is most needed. So we have seen Herculean government efforts, programs rolled out incredibly efficiently and quickly that have had a positive outcome. I think about SERB, and I think about the provincial efforts that have been made. We kind of lost in many ways some of the party lines a little bit, and that was nice to see. In some areas where we saw, it didn't matter which political stripe you were at, we wanted to make sure that everybody was getting what they needed to be able to survive. So we saw that positive outcome. Then we saw libraries on the city level instantly become food banks. So we set up pop-up food banks where librarians were essentially out of an opportunity to serve through literacy, and so that was a great distribution network that immediately came up. We partnered with Rahul Singh from Global Medics, where we needed to provide safety for individuals who were coming to the food bank, but we needed to make sure that the food bank itself could continue to operate. And so we were concerned about contamination and virus spread. So we set up an emergency field hospital tent within a day or two of the shutdown.
I was with Raul on I don't know, Saturday or Sunday at the Muslim Welfare Center, and he was supplying food there. And before that, we were at UTSC that have set aside their entire gymnasium for the lentils and the redistribution or repackaging, if you will, of the lentils. Quite an operation with Global Medic.
Yeah, when we had to bring an international relief organization to the city of Toronto, I mean, we can, where we're kind of
very good.
What is important to realize is that it can be done, that there is a fantastic leader in Raul, who just gets it done. And that's one of the I love Raul for many reasons, but one of the reasons is he just gets it done. He sees a need and he goes out and he makes it happen. So we had this situation of of a network that was depleted, and then our own transportation challenges started to come in. We had a number of staff who said, "I'm afraid to come to work. I don't want to drive a truck to multiple locations within the city and potentially put me and my family in harm's way." And so AMJ Campbell came up, and they said, well, moves aren't happening right now. Why don't we have our fleet pick up the food that is being distributed, or that needs picking up at fire halls and grocery stores across the city? And so they stepped up. And so there was the province provided $8 million to buy hundreds of thousands of hampers that were distributed across the province. The federal government, your government, said it makes sense for us to partner with Food Banks Canada, and there was the distribution of $50 million that resulted in us being able to purchase food because people were not donating food in March and April. When the call out to happen to say, listen, store 2 weeks worth of food, supply chains were obviously affected by that. And people made decisions that they needed to put food within their pantries rather than dropping off at a fire hall. And so those funds were perfectly placed for us to be able to make a difference. And then this past week, the announcement of $22 million to Second Harvest and $11 million to food banks across the country to purchase surplus foods from farmers across the country, I think is starting to show some imaginative ways that we can respond that are environmentally sound, that are good for farmers, that are making sure that there is win-win situations happening across the country. And so I'm pleased to see with some of the creativity that has happened. That has been some of the good elements. But going back to the negative side, too many people are coming into lines at the food bank. We are up about 34% in terms of usage in the past few months. Just a strain on the situation. We have families who do not believe that they will be able to pay for rent in the next month or two. And so we're forecasting through our research department a critical time when it comes to evictions and a tidal wave of evictions that we think we're only moments away from.
That's interesting and a little bit depressing. I was intrigued that the government decided to go and do the food waste program. I mean, it's sort of an idea that has percolated out there for a while, and it was interesting, like you say, both the good side and the bad side, and there's interesting good things that comes out of a pandemic, and yet also it's a response to a very bad thing. But there's several initiatives that are being pressed on us, particularly the food waste, but also the guaranteed income. And I don't know where we'll land on that one. It's a massive program, but it would at least mitigate against what you're observing, or potentially observing, which is the evictions from people from their homes.
Just to
in some respects, it's the worst of times. Mostly it's the worst of times, but it's also in some respects it's the best of times, because ideas are moving forward that have been stagnant for a while.
You know, and on the guaranteed income side of things, we have, we believe that there needs to be a safety net, and a guaranteed income, if it's on its own, is just a tightrope. And so we just need to make sure that we're talking about all-encompassing safety nets. You know, is this an opportunity for us to study what a GIS would look like? Absolutely. Does it make sense in some areas? Absolutely. I think that it's worth pursuing. I was disappointed, and I've said it to the Premier directly, that the decision to stop the study on the guaranteed income, because you know, let's do our social policy from research and data, and then find out what works and what motivates people, and how we can make sure that that everybody has a basic, but that we are going to make social policy decisions on research. So I was disappointed when that study stopped.
The previous government, previous Ontario government had, I think, pilot studies in Hamilton and Lindsay and one other community that doesn't come to mind to me. Sorry, where?
I think it was Smith Falls.
Smith Falls. Okay. So those are discrete communities. There is structural poverty there in many of them, and my impression was that the initial results were quite positive, but there were that it mitigated against the multitude of programs and the way in which people had to go here or there and everywhere just to have basic needs met. So,
yeah. Well, this might also be the catalyst for us having a deeper conversation when it comes to pharmacare across the country. We might have a discussion about, well, when it comes to rebuilding, what is the best way for us to do that? Certainly green initiatives would be, you know, come to mind, but, you know, does it make sense for us to be investing in a national childcare strategy, which would allow for more people, particularly those where we know that this recession is has a gender bias, and that has a greater probability of alleviating that discrepancy. So maybe it is the opportunity to just say, how do we rebuild better? And so, you know, those are the things that I'm hopeful for, because what we do at the Daily Bread is we make sure that the immediate need is taken care of. But, you know, we do look downstream, we do look further ahead, and we ask the question around policy. What is the best policy that will decrease the lineups? Every day, I go outside and I see the lineup at the tent that Raul has sent up, and I see a long line that often goes almost around the block of individuals who have had to make that difficult choice to come to a food bank, and so our hope is that in parallel, we'll get the emergency food relief out, but we will advocate for the systemic change that emulates the Canadian values that I think we want to have.
Well said, but and we have to bring this to a close, but I can't let you go without you sharing your latest adventure on the Atlantic Ocean, because in some respects, we're fortunate to be even having a conversation here. So, give us the cheap and cheerful version of what you nearly did to yourself.
Sure. Well, maybe a cheap version. It wasn't cheerful for my mom. I had the opportunity to sail with my cousin Jeffrey Fairbank, who's a brilliant sailor and lives in your riding.
Has to be brilliant. Everybody who lives in my riding are all brilliant.
And we had the opportunity to sail from Whitby to Portugal, 1,400 miles off the coast. A rogue wave hit the boat, and we were incapacitated and did not have the opportunity to complete the journey. Fortunately, Captain Wendell Hendricks aboard the Ardmore Sea Lifter was only a few hours away and deviated course, and this 750-foot oil tanker came alongside the boat, and we were able to climb aboard, and I got to learn a lot about how an oil tanker works, and I enjoyed having a week as we steamed our way towards New York City. It was a bit of a life-changing event, and grateful for the outcome. For the disappointed for my cousin who lost Boundless, which was the name of the vessel. But that gratitude far outweighs the disappointment of the voyage not yet completed. My mother has said that there is no way, she didn't say in hell, but she meant it, that will happen again. And if it does, I would be out of any inheritance from the family. So my response to that has been, I guess I'll try on the boat you guys end up buying me down the road. So that's the cheap and cheerful story.
Okay, well, in my family, that would mean you're out $20. Yeah. So, well, thank you, Neil, for doing this. Life does have its twists and turns, and it is a fascinating journey. And you, in your relatively brief journey, have had a number of interesting twists and turns, and yet, as I said earlier, I admire your willingness to put your faith on the line on a daily basis and serve our citizens in such an admirable way. So again, thank you for talking about the way in which you give back to our community. So with that, thank you for listening and tuning in again.
Thank you, John.